Hi, welcome to Physionic, where we learn the body from the macro to the micro. If that's something you think you'd be interested in, then consider subscribing. Guys, today's lecture content is going to be covering how high blood pressure or hypertension leads to chronic heart failure. So without further ado, let's jump right into this lecture. All right, folks, let's get right into it. So here you've got my, as usual, relatively badly drawn heart, although I'm kind of proud of what I drew here because it's really not that terrible. Let me orient you, if you're not familiar with heart anatomy, on what you're exactly looking here. So blood flow is going to come in from the top here. It's actually also going to come in from the bottom, but again, I'm not trying to make this an anatomy course right now. You've got blood flow that's coming into, this is your right atrium. So from the right atrium, this is deoxygenated blood, meaning that it is blood that is low in oxygen. So the blood is going to go into your right atrium, then into your right ventricle. Your right ventricle will then contract. So this musculature, this myocardium, will contract, pushing the blood through the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery will lead that blood to the lungs, which I did not actually draw out because I was already testing my drawing abilities. And then of course at your lungs, when you breathe, you fill your lungs with oxygen. So that oxygen then goes into your bloodstream, and then you have reoxygenated blood. So this is high oxygen level blood, which goes into your left atrium and then goes into your left ventricle. And this is actually where I want to focus things. So when you have high blood pressure, what that means is you've got blood pressure that's extremely high throughout your system. So it's not just your heart that's at risk. You have risk across your entire body, across your entire vasculature. If you look at your arm, if you were to look at your arm, and you can see all that green bluish arteries and veins that are going through your body, those are going to be having a lot of resistance against them. And that is due to chronic high blood pressure or hypertension. So hypertension is going to be measured, or is kind of an accurate measure based off of your aorta. Your aorta is right here. So as oxygenated blood enters your left ventricle, then it gets pushed. It gets, again, this myocardium, this heart muscle, will then contract, and it will contract this way and push that blood into your aorta, and then from your aorta it'll go up into your head, and it'll go down into your feet, and etc., etc. So it goes essentially throughout your entire body. Now, the blood pressure is the pressure, the difference between the pressure in your aorta and the pressure in your ventricle, your left ventricle specifically. So if you have low blood pressure, what that means is that it's going to take less of this musculature to push this blood past this valve into your aorta, because there is a separating valve between your left ventricle and your aorta, and that is going to remain closed until you can develop enough pressure inside this left ventricle to push open, to force open this valve. So once this valve opens, then you've got this oxygenated blood that goes into the aorta and goes into the rest of the body. So now I've drawn in here a number, and that is going to be the pressure that is in your body. So we're just gonna, there are some specifics here that I'm leaving out just because I want to keep this as succinct as possible. So the pressure in your aorta is essentially, we're just going to relate that to your body blood pressure. So when you put a blood pressure cuff on your arm or on your ankle or whatever you might use, you're going to get a blood pressure reading. So that's giving you a reading of the vasculature. That's giving you a reading of your body blood pressure. So imagine if your blood pressure is high. In this situation, it's 154 millimeters of mercury systolic and 82 millimeters of mercury diastolic. So this high pressure situation needs to be overcome by your ventricle, which is now filled with blood. Let's say all that blood that went through here is now in your left ventricle, and it needs to generate enough force from this musculature, this myocardium right here, to overcome 154 over 82. That means that when it's contracting, it needs to produce 154 or more. Actually, it needs to be greater. It needs to be 155 millimeters of mercury of pressure, if you want to look at it that way, that can overcome this valve and lead to it opening so that the blood flow can go into your aorta and then can go to the rest of your body. And it needs to do that for every single beat of your heart. So keep that in mind. Think about that for just 1 second. If that needs to be the case, and we know that if we increase resistance, and of course you can also even look at volume, if you increase the amount of times that your heart has to beat, that means that this muscle, just like any other muscle, is going to have to start to increase in size. So now that I've made a jump cut and you can see how this musculature is going to increase in size, you can see that it's not only getting much larger because this pressure is constantly there. So these myocytes, these muscle fibers, need to constantly keep growing and growing and growing to meet demand, especially if this number continues to increase. If your hypertension gets worse and worse, or if it's just prolonged over a period of time, then this musculature is going to keep growing. So that's fine to a degree, but if it continues for years and years and years, that leads to a problem because this ventricle, this space, the actual area where your blood would be, is now getting smaller and smaller and smaller because this musculature is building this way and this way. So then you have this massive muscle that's trying to push smaller and smaller amounts of blood against a higher and higher pressure, or even a pressure that's just high and stays high for many decades, which means then you are ejecting less and less blood. And if you're ejecting less and less blood, your heart is getting more and more and more cues from the rest of your body. Hey, we are not getting enough blood. So what it does is it's going to push harder and harder and harder. It's going to beat faster. It's going to beat as powerfully as it possibly can. And this is going to continue to grow and grow and grow until this area is so small that each beat no longer can sustain the blood flow that needs to be going through your body. And this is then the limiting factor, this pressure from outside that needs to be overcome by this ventricle is being led to eventually your heart failing and you dying. So hopefully you found that informative. And if you did, I really hope that I have the pleasure of speaking with you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.